About 5 years ago, when my 13-year-old daughter found out she was pregnant, my husband and daughter committed suicide in front of me. Until then, we had a happy life. My husband and I had a good marriage, and we had our lovely daughter. If there was anything to complain about in what seemed like my smooth-sailing life, it was only David, my brother-in-law, who would barge into our house and mess around drinking.
Mom, what should I do? I think I'm pregnant.
Our life changed drastically when my daughter, Christina, uttered one word.
I heard about it. What have you done? It's the talk of the neighborhood. It's embarrassing for me and my parents. It's because you, her mother, didn't educate her properly. That's why this happened.
My brother-in-law David yelled, taking over our home. My husband Jake, Christina, and I were all exhausted, and eventually my worst fears happened.
What are you doing? Stop them right now.
Jake and Christina's car plunged off a cliff. In an instant they were out of my reach.
It's your fault. Why did you take your eyes off them? Give me back my brother and niece.
You're such a cold person to abandon your husband and daughter.
Blamed and broken, I was forced to live like a slave to David and my in-laws, Mary. I found Jake's will and decided to take revenge. I will make them pay. Jake loved to drink, didn't he? You and he often enjoyed drinking together.
Yeah, that's right. It was the biggest joy of my life. It's all gone because of you now.
After this, suddenly, Jake and Christina appeared on the balcony, revealing a shocking truth. I am Michelle, a 40-year-old housewife. I live with my husband Jake and our daughter Christina. I also had a part-time office job, but my income was just small enough to cover our household expenses, and we depended on my husband's earnings for most of our living. Christina and I get along well, and she even confides her troubles to me. Our marriage was extremely good. Jake tends to drink a bit too much, and when he does, he gets loud and forgets himself, but it's never been to the point where I'd run out of patience with him. I do everything I can for my family, and Jake works hard every day. Christina is serious about her studies and extracurricular activities, and she has a good reputation at school. There were always little annoyances day to day, but I believed we could overcome them as a family. Until that happened, I never imagined my life, my family, could be turned upside down like this. David started frequenting our home around the time he got divorced, which was right after I heard about his divorce. I wasn't told why he divorced, but seeing his arrogant attitude and rough behavior, it seemed obvious why someone would divorce him. Knowing Jake couldn't say no due to his timid nature and fondness for alcohol, David always brought drinks over. Every time he came over without calling, I had to prepare appetizers for two and deal with Jake, who would laugh loudly, and David, who was boisterous whether he was drunk or not. I have work tomorrow. This is so exhausting. Seeing David and Jake drinking happily together, ignoring how I felt, truly disappointed me. Their attitudes when drunk were strikingly similar, which only added to my fatigue. Hey honey, about David, could he maybe cut down on his visits? It's tough for me when he comes over on weekdays and Sundays because I have work the next day.
Oh, yeah. I know it's bad. I've been meaning to say something, but I just can't seem to refuse him. I think he's just lonely.
Jake usually prioritizes my opinions, so when he said that, I couldn't say anything more. I wonder how long this kind of life will continue. I sighed many times with that thought.
Hey, there's no more finger food. What an inconsiderate wife. Bring some more.
I'm not your wife. I wanted to scream, but I just brought some simple appetizers instead. Jake just looked at me apologetically, never daring to speak up to David. But I supposed it couldn't be helped. Their parents clearly favored David and looked down on Jake. It seemed like that kind of family environment had always been there, so it was almost like Jake was brainwashed into not being able to stand up to David. Just endure it. We must endure. Because of David's overly arrogant and rough attitude, I always told Christina not to come out of her room when he was around. Christina seemed to dislike her Uncle David, staying hidden in her room whenever he visited.
Isn't Christina coming out? It's rude that her uncle came to visit and she didn't even come out to greet me. Doesn't she have any manners?
Despite being mocked our daughter, Jake and I just gave a weak smile and let it slide. It was better than letting her meet this man.
You are my brother, but you have no taste in women. How could you like such a plain and unthoughtful woman? If you were a man, you'd marry someone prettier and more considerate.
Please, let's just stop it. Let's have the drinks you brought.
You always run to alcohol. That's another one of your faults.
Maybe so.
It seemed like Jake, who usually enjoyed drinks, was becoming less and less keen on drinking with David as time went on. Seeing us constantly being belittled, Christina would help out with chores the next day, showing her concern. We couldn't resist him even though he was treating us badly. I felt pathetic for making Christina worry, and thought that one day I'd cut ties with him. The problem was Jake's feelings. He was raised to be oppressed. He seemed unable to decide to cut ties with his family. I couldn't relate, having lost my parents early and having no siblings. So, until his resolve was formed, our family chose to endure quietly. One day, out of the blue, a trouble other than David showed up in our lives.
Mom, what should I do? I think I'm pregnant.
At first, I didn't understand what she had said. As I gradually grasped the meaning, I nearly raised my voice, but seeing her anxious face, I managed to hold back. Is that true?
Yes. I took a test.
She looked like she might burst into tears any moment. I gently patted her shoulder to comfort her. Just to be sure, let's test again. I'll go buy the kit. It turned out she really was pregnant. I asked her who was the guy, but she stubbornly refused to answer. Whether I asked or my husband asked, her response was the same. We discussed for hours as a family. We took Christina's opinions into account and ultimately, I believe we reached a conclusion that everyone could agree on. It's good that we found out about Christina's pregnancy early. This way, we can still respond. Relief was short-lived, as David heard the news and barged into our house to berate us.
I heard about it. What have you done? It's the talk of the neighborhood. It's embarrassing for me and my parents. It's because you, her mother, didn't raise her right. That's why this has happened.
Please lower your voice. You're scaring her. Unable to endure any longer, I retorted, and David smirked at me derisively.
playing the mother now. It's all too late.
After causing a scene, David left the house. The next day, the in-laws called and said similar things to Jake. Even as we tried to overcome the crisis, those around us kept dragging us down. To ease my anxiety, I hugged Christina tightly. With Jake busy at work, the responsibility of looking after Christina fell mostly on me. When he could, Jake would join us, but usually, it was up to me. "There's a call, sorry, go ahead, I'll catch up." Returning from the hospital with Christina and Jake, I received a call from her teacher. It was a call to inquire about her recent situation, but given the complexity of our current circumstances, it inevitably turned into a long conversation.
What are you doing? Stop them right now.
As I finished the call and headed toward the car, I was shocked to see David appear. Confused by his shouting, I looked in the direction he pointed. Jake's car was heading straight toward a cliff. "No, stop!" I screamed in panic, but the car didn't stop. I tried to catch up by running, but the car was faster, jumping over the fence. Oh my gosh! As I reached out as far as I could, the car slipped down the cliff, as if it was mocking me. Rushing to follow, I was restrained by hospital staff.
Calm down, please. Someone call the rescue team and the police.
I crumbled into tears as David glared at me from behind.
It's your fault. Why did you take your eyes off them? Give me back my brother and niece.
Despite always enduring his words, they now pierced my heart. The looks and voices of the in-laws also unsettled my mind.
What a terrible my daughter-in-law.
You're such a cold person to abandon your husband and daughter.
With Jake and Christina gone, I lost the support of my heart. Being cursed like this, I started to care less about my life. For the next 5 years, I lived like a slave, being ordered around by these people. 5 years later, I was completely worn out. Why did you leave me behind? My wedding ring, now much too loose due to my weight loss, slipped around my finger. My in-laws and David had been telling me to sell the house, but it was full of precious family memories, and I fiercely refused to let it go. Now, this house was the only place where I could find peace. Especially in our bedroom, I could almost remember the feeling of forgotten breaths.
Hey, Michelle, how long are you going to rest? Come and make dinner now.
Yes, right away. I responded to my mother-in-law, Mary, shouting, and got up. Then, my ring slipped off my finger and rolled under the bed. Oops, wait. As I crawled under the bed to retrieve it, I noticed something odd. What's this? There was something stuck to the edge of the bed. I picked up my ring and reached for the curious item. It was an envelope and a voice recorder. Maybe this is. Feeling a stir in my chest, I turned on the recorder. It was dusty but not broken, and I could listen to the contents. Thank you, my dear. Hearing Jake's voice for the first time in 5 years brought tears to my eyes. And then, I made up my mind. No more crying, no more living in sadness. I had to live looking forward. And to do that, I had to take revenge on them. I would make sure they got what they deserved. So, I started investigating David's daily behaviors. I looked into his attitude at work, his job performance, and even talked to his ex-wife. David had a daughter, and the custody was with the mother. It seems he had repeatedly asked to see his daughter, but his ex-wife continued to ignore him. He also frequently caused troubles at work with his arrogant attitude and by hitting on female employees. I wanted revenge not just on David but on my in-laws as well. I steadily gathered evidence and prepared for my revenge. A month later, as usual, I was called to the in-laws' house to prepare dinner.
You never improve at cooking. The food is too salty. Are you trying to kill us?
You should be grateful that you're still related to us. Otherwise, you'd be lost by now.
Know your place. What's with that sullen face? Can't you be more pleasant?
I'm sorry, I'll bring the drinks now. I continued to move mechanically while being scolded.
You really lack charm.
While still complaining, David drank from the glass.
Don't empty my glass.
As instructed, I poured his drink. While pouring the second glass, I muttered, Jake loved to drink, didn't he? You and he often enjoyed drinking together. The in-laws' eyes sharpened and David glared at me.
Yeah, that's right. It was the biggest joy of my life. It's all gone because of you now.
David splashed the remaining drink from his glass at me. The sharp smell was unpleasant, but it was the reaction I expected. No, it's fine. My husband is here today.
What did you say?
Shadows appeared on the balcony. One looked like an adult man, and the other like a middle school student.
What is this? What kind of joke is this?
David screamed, but I didn't answer. The in-laws were flustered too, though not as visibly frightened as David. Then, I heard Jake's voice.
I'm gonna be silenced by my brother?
The in-laws gasped, their eyes darting back and forth. David's face paled for a moment, then he raised his voice as if to drown out Jake's.
Hey, what's this supposed to mean? Enough with the jokes.
Jake continued talking, holding Christina's hand.
I found out why David got divorced. I heard it was because he made advances towards his own daughter. I pressed Christina for the truth, and she revealed that it happened after I had fallen asleep when David was visiting.
That's nonsense. You think you can get away with this?
David lunged at me, so I fled to a corner of the room. His eyes darted around, his face slick with an unusual sweat. He was clearly shaken up.
Christina says she's afraid to go to the police. For my behavior, David must suspect I know the truth. There are times when he glares at me with terrifying eyes.
Hey, stop it. Where is this coming from? Enough already.
David's breathing became ragged quickly, and his complexion turned a reddish black. His bloodshot eyes frantically scanned the surroundings. It was clear he was panicking. Anyone could see he had something to hide. I looked at the man before me with cold eyes. What's the matter? It's your beloved brother's voice. Haven't you missed it? Maybe you should cherish this moment. David glared at me, but his legs were trembling, unable to move.
What are you? Stop it. This. You won't be forgiven for.
That's my line. David was in disarray. The man who had tormented me for 5 years was losing his color, which was satisfying. But it wasn't enough. My anger wouldn't subside until he was more shaken.
I convinced reluctant Christina to get a prenatal DNA test. The results are hidden in my room. I intend to go to the police, but it might be too late.
David let out an indescribable scream. He rushed to the balcony and repeatedly banged on the window glass. Mary, who seemed panicked, hesitantly spoke to David. She was probably also worried that the window glass might break.
David, what's wrong? Calm down.
Shut up. Get back.
Whoa.
David pushed his mother, and she fell on her butt on the floor. My father-in-law, George, rushed to help her up, but both were too shaken by David's drastic change to do anything but look on with fearful eyes.
Stop it. What's the point of doing this now? It's useless.
Then he dashed out to the balcony, and seeing the figures beyond the railing, he collapsed.
Jesus Christ. Why?
David's fearful, pale expression was almost comical. He remained seated on the floor inside the room, continuing to stare at the figures appearing on the balcony.
How? How is this possible? Why are you alive?
Aren't you happy? Hearing my voice, David turned his head towards me. Even though he glared, I was not afraid at all anymore.
What are you talking about? What does this mean? What's this voice? You did this, didn't you?
Rather than that, what do you gain by doing this now? Do you know something about what Jake said?
Well,
he was at a loss for words. After looking around anxiously, he suddenly stood up with trembling legs and shouted,
it's a false accusation. I don't know what you're talking about.
My in-laws, who hadn't grasped the situation, snapped back to reality by his scream. They glared at me, raising their voices.
That's a poor joke. What do you think you're doing to your husband and daughter?
Knowing his parents were on his side seemed to calm him down a bit. David cooled down a bit and walked towards me.
That's right. What was that shadow anyway? You set this up, didn't you?
How could I? Didn't they come out glaring at you? And it's the voice of someone who's been dead for 5 years. How could I have prepared that? David let out a weird scream. He sat down on the spot and held his head. It seemed pretty clear what he had done in the past. Yet, my in-laws didn't seem ready to give up.
There are things you should and shouldn't say.
That's right. Our son would never do such a thing.
How naive can people be in this situation? But it seemed to have spurred David. He seemed to have an idea and pointed at me with a slight smile while squatting. Is he unable to stand up, pull a thing?
Yes, that's it. It's projection mapping.
Oh, you figured it out, right? Indeed, the shadows of Jake and Christina were created using projection mapping. While my in-laws and David were out, I had set up a transparent screen on the balcony. I placed a small projector in the yard, projecting the figures from there. At night, neither the screen or the projector would be noticed. David was not pleased that I admitted it so easily, his face turning red as he spat at me.
Being clever, huh? You want to harass me that much? I could sue you.
Go ahead. I'm thinking of suing you too.
What did you say?
What I handed him was the prenatal DNA test results Jake had left. Faced with undeniable evidence, his complexion turned even darker.
Give it here.
Seeing him charge at me, my in-laws screamed. Even those who blindly supported David seemed terrified by this sight.
Just some paper. It doesn't mean anything.
David snatched a paper with the diagnosis from me and tore it to shreds. Then, seemingly relieved, he began to laugh loudly.
All this. It's obviously a lie. It's useless. Everything is useless.
His obvious fear was practically a confession. Not bothering to reconsider the content before tearing the paper was like a second confession. Believing what was in front of him was real also showed a lack of composure. The waste is on your part. I wouldn't bring the original here. The real one is safely stored.
What?
He gritted his teeth and glared at me. Then the door opened.
You really don't know when to quit, do you? It's over for you. Just give up.
David turned pale as he glared in the direction of the voice. I called her. She was more than willing to help. She was David's ex-wife, Sarah Miller. When I started digging into David's past, I reached out to her, and she happily agreed to help with my revenge.
When we divorced, I was just trying to get away. But now that I know the current situation, I can't stay silent. I'll tell you exactly why we divorced. I've even got my daughter's consent.
That's not the deal. We agreed no lawsuits if I agreed to the divorce.
I'm not the one suing. Michelle will be the one to sue, and I'll just testify about your past.
Hearing Sarah's words, David spat and yelled.
Traitor. What a shameless woman.
What are you talking about? Getting up and bad-mouthing our David.
Despite being confronted by two men, Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she sneered and looked down on them with a tilt of her head.
Do you still not understand the situation, or are you just pretending not to know? It's appalling.
What? No respect for your elders.
Mary also snapped at Sarah from behind George.
I didn't like you from the beginning because you were cocky and talked back to me. I don't recall inviting you to our home. Just leave.
Sarah's face showed utter contempt in response to my in-law's words.
So you used Michelle because she doesn't talk back. You just made her work to suit yourselves. You're despicable.
It must have hit a nerve. Mary's cheeks flushed.
You already left our family, so don't you dare to talk to us.
How infuriating. Bad wives sticking together to harass us. Why do we have to suffer like this?
It's astounding how unaware they are. They treated me like a slave and drove me to this point. Maybe if they hadn't discriminated against their child, things wouldn't have turned out this way. Maybe it's because you spoiled David too much.
Your beloved David is now officially a criminal. Maybe you should reflect on the shame within your family before blaming your son's wife. Playing the victim to this extent is actually impressive.
David's complexion changed. Being insulted by his ex-wife was something his pride couldn't stand. It was too late for anything, but he desperately glared at us as if threatening.
Am I a criminal? Don't joke.
You might know this, but engaging with a minor under 16 by someone 5 years older is a crime in itself.
Evidence. It's just that piece of paper you have. Like I'd be arrested over that.
His excuses were desperate. I was utterly astounded. Sarah was just as dismayed.
After you tear up that piece of paper without even checking what's on it, and still claim it as evidence.
Sarah sighed deeply. I wanted to sigh too. If you really want, I can call another guest. It seems David is still not ready to admit his guilt, since he seems to have forgotten the incident from 5 years ago. How about something more recent?
What?
The other guest I called was Ryan West, his junior co-worker. He had also helped with the balcony's projection mapping, a reliable man.
Hi, boss. Since I was helping Michelle, I thought I'd stop by to say hello.
Ryan, have you forgotten how I took care of you?
Took care of me. I have plenty of bad memories of being blamed for failures, having my achievements stolen, and being driven to quit by colleagues.
How dare you?
David didn't look like he could stand up. It seems he really had lost all his strength. It's a pleasure for me to see him in his misery.
Your work attitude has been a problem for a while. Your arrogant behavior and the way you treated female employees troubled everyone. Some of us, including me, have already submitted recordings of your misconduct to an IC recorder. You'll definitely be fired.
What did you say? How are we supposed to live then?
It's typical that their first concern upon hearing their prized son will be fired is their own well-being. How shallow can they be? I'm too astounded to speak. Sarah seems to agree, and we exchange looks. Ryan must feel the same, but he keeps smiling as he deals with Mary.
You can live off your pension. That should be fine.
Do you think this is someone else's problem? Are you trying to ruin us?
George confronts Ryan. Perhaps he thinks Ryan's smile means he's easy to intimidate.
No, I'm not thinking that at all. But apart from the firing, we're also preparing a lawsuit. Well, former manager now. I can't predict your financial outlook, as it involves him too.
A lawsuit?
Why is this even happening?
David is too stunned to follow the conversation. Only Maya and Lars are panicking. It's satisfying to see, but I feel bad for Ryan, who's being pressed.
An overcharging scheme in the contracting fees has come to light. It seems he colluded with a subcontractor, who has confessed, and now the former manager David's name has come up, so we're preparing for that. The police will be here soon, so please prepare yourselves.
Maya and Lars seem to be at a loss for words. I observe the faces of the hateful trio as they turn pale. After sufficiently savoring the moment, I decide to add one more thing. This is the IC recorder that contained Jake's will. The voice of him that just played was his will stored here. The data is already saved elsewhere, so I decided to use this to record everything you've done to me for a month.
What are you saying, Michelle?
Don't start using my name now. After all, you've been calling me hey, bitch, or idiot. The treatment I've received from my in-laws and David was definitely illegal. I've recorded them for a month, and my lawyer has assured me the evidence is more than enough to sue. I'm also ready to sue. This recorder is Jake's keepsake, and I've decided to use it to move forward with my life. It served me well. It felt like my husband was helping me. He suffered terribly at your hands too. Maybe this will give him some peace.
How could you treat family like this? Unbelievable. We gave you a place when you had nowhere to go, and this is how you repay us.
Do you enjoy hurting people? You all are sick. This isn't human behavior.
I'll just return those words to you. These people are headed for ruin anyway. I can't move forward without returning the favor properly. I love Jake, but I don't want to be related to you anymore. I'm cutting ties.
That can't be. You can't just decide that.
No, I've already filed the paperwork. Since my husband is gone, I can officially sever ties with you on my own terms. My in-laws are saying something, but they're either too confused or too emotional to make any sense. All I see is their faces turning red and spittle flying as they shout. Just don't come to me for help no matter how tough things get. I've never and will never rely on you. We are strangers now. My in-laws scream. Their words are slurred, but I caught their final retort.
That's our line.
Don't ever show your face again.
Yes, I'll gladly do that. All preparations are in place. The results of the prenatal DNA test and the original of Jake's will have already been delivered to the police, and Sarah has long since given her testimony. Choosing these words now, I'm just waiting for them to dig their own grave. Sure enough, David stumbles towards us. We ignore him and head towards the front door.
You think you're gonna get off easy? I'll make sure you regret this.
As we leave the house, he catches up, lunging at us with a fierce expression. But this is exactly what I wanted.
Stop it.
The police, who had been alerted, rushed in and grabbed David's arm. It seems he has committed yet another crime. Such simple people are so much easier to handle. I believe you saw it, but I was just threatened. The officer nodded, and my restrained David yelled out. His voice was no longer forming coherent words. He exposed his abomination to the police. That was nothing short of reckless.
He's over.
Sarah whispered with a laugh, and I couldn't help but laugh too. It appears she had also suffered a lot because of him. She's now happily remarried to a wonderful man, and seemed relieved to finally be able to move forward, as she mentioned later with a smile. Afterwards, David was fired from his company and is being prosecuted. It seems he's been sued for an amount of embezzlement he could never repay in his lifetime. His face made it to the newspapers, so he'll likely never land a decent job again. The rumors have spread, and even my in-laws are feeling uncomfortable due to the neighborhood gossip. Despite repeated apology letters from my in-laws, worsened by David's arrest and the deteriorated relationships with neighbors, I've ignored them all. When I threatened to actually sue if they continued to bother me, they finally backed off. The in-laws who once doted on David are now cursing him daily. Thanks to Sarah, I got a job at her relative's company. This has allowed me to start a real second chapter in my life. Although I had spent much time grieving, I was finally able to retaliate for Jake and Christina, and it's slowly helping me to become more positive. Then, 3 years later.
Michelle, would you like to go see a movie this Saturday?
That sounds lovely. What kind of movie is it? I've started dating Ryan, who used to work under David.
It's a movie I think you'd like, Michelle. It was in the commercials yesterday.
I wanted to see that one. Thank you, Ryan. While I still love Jake, the frequent contact with Ryan after that incident sparked something. I was genuinely surprised when Ryan, 5 years my junior, confessed his feelings. It turns out he also lost his wife early, and now we spend our time leisurely as those left behind.
Michelle, Ryan. Hello.
You were on a date, weren't you? I hope I didn't interrupt.
The voice came from the entrance. I stood up to greet the two. Joey, Sarah, welcome.
Please don't be mean. There are some cakes, so let's all have some.
Ryan said. Zoe jumped up with joy.
I'm so happy. Thank you, Ryan.
I still keep in touch with Sarah and her daughter Zoe. The people around me have been very kind to me as I mourn my daughter. Zoe and I have become very close, and sometimes I feel a bittersweet happiness thinking Christina might have grown up to be like her. I've managed to obtain a peaceful and wonderful life like this. I intend to continue living, cherishing, and thanking those around me.